In today's Locked On Pelicans, I'll tell you why the loss to the Rockets means the Pelicans are wasting this season, and it goes beyond tanking for a top draft pick. It's the Friday episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans and NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter, here with y'all on this Friday, day after the Pelicans maybe hit rock bottom against the Houston Rockets, losing. The score completely just went away from me for some reason. 128-111 here. No one needs to see that score. It was that bad anyway. But we're going to break down why this loss was so alarming for New Orleans. They're not learning any lessons, and that has big implications on the future. We'll take a look at the starting lineup when Zion Williamson comes back in about 2 weeks. Is there enough shooting in that? Because this game raised serious questions about it. And this game also maybe hurt Brandon Ingram's trade value even though he didn't play, and I'll explain why. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel because right now new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets. If your first $5 bet wins, visit FanDuel.com to get started. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today into every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the number one Pelicans podcast covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well and become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday. And if you're an everydayer, let me know in the comments down below. So let's get into this loss against the Houston Rockets. If you're an everydayer or a longtime listener, about a week or so ago, you heard me talking about the loss on the road to Houston, probably being rock bottom for New Orleans. Well, I think this might be rock bottom again for the Pelicans here, as they just looked flat out bad, like just really, really bad in this game. They looked completely lost here. And for those who've been with me throughout the whole season one, like, good on y'all for loving this team to that degree. You heard me talk a lot about moral victories earlier in the year. And moral victories, what they do is like, oh, we were close. We could have won that game. If we clean this stuff up, it'll start translating to wins earlier on in the year. Those were learning experience. There were things to take away from that you can improve upon here. But when you look at what New Orleans is doing, basically the same thing over and over and over again, with no changes or anything like that, it makes you really concerned about the direction of this franchise. Those moral victories earlier on in the season are no longer moral victories. Those were just like a harbinger of stuff to come, of bad mistakes and things like that the Pelicans have not cleaned up whatsoever. That's on the players and the coaches too. You looked at them in this game and they looked directionless, lacking effort, not knowing what they were doing in fast breaks, in transitions. Should they go for rebounds? Should they run back? They just looked like a completely lost team. They didn't look like an NBA team with the way they played in this game, truthfully here. You know, that lack of attention to detail, knowing what to do, it's just unbelievably disappointing 30 games into the season that's a thing. We're not expecting this team to win, but lose by 5, lose by 1, that's a different story than getting down 30-28 at the end of 3 quarters here. There has been absolutely no growth from this team whatsoever. They started a competent starting lineup. Trey Murphy, Herb Jones, CJ McCollum, DeJounte Murray, and Yves Missi is a competent NBA starting lineup. You don't get blown out 30 points at home. And that's what happened here. And that's what's been happening basically regularly to this team over the past month. In a way, you can almost look at them and think that they've regressed. This is not okay in the slightest. Let me make that very clear again. This is not even remotely okay for them to be doing. These are mistakes that have needed to have been cleaned up, and they just aren't. So when you have 3 days off, look, they were probably off on Christmas not doing anything. When you have that much time off, though, to figure some things out, and you just come out and you look even worse, that says a lot about the state of the franchise and the lack of direction that it seems like they have right now. Now, again, Zion's not playing. Ingram's not playing. They'll look different with those guys back out there on the court. And more on that in the next segment here. But this is not okay. And I want to go back to Willie Green's first season. they suffered a lot of losses. I think they lost 13 in a row that season before going on to make the playoffs. And I remember in November, he was saying the losses that we're suffering now are going to lead to wins in March and April. And he was right. They cleaned up what was going wrong. They improved as the season went on, made a trade for CJ McCollum, which helped. Then they got into the playoffs through the in-season tournament, the play-in tournament. You don't seem to get the same vibe from this team right now. They look checked out, right? Like you're 5 and whatever it is right now, 26, 27. And yeah, they've got nothing to play for here. But you need to figure some things out, right? Is Willie Green your head coach going forward or not? Look, I think a lot of us are probably in agreement. The answer to there is no. But if he's not, figure out what you need to change. Are some of these guys going to be on the roster or not going forward? But if no one's playing to the best of their ability, guys that you're going to have to keep next season, you're not learning much from this. And it's starting to feel like this season is a big loss. This is a way that they could avoid disaster. If you look at it like the Memphis Grizzlies last year, they realized who they needed to keep, who they needed to move on from. Now they're one of the top 3 seeds and just literally set tonight a record for most points scored in franchise history. It was a down year, drafted the guy they needed, came back and looked really good. New Orleans doesn't feel like they're on that same trajectory right now because we don't have answers to any of the questions that we've wanted that they need to have by now. And that's been a really big problem. So yeah, you can be bad this season and you can get a high draft pick and we'll call that an accomplishment, but you're also not going to go through a full-on rebuild and be bad next year either. You're going to try and be competitive. Who should stay and who should go on this roster? And a lot of you who are angry after this loss, and I get this, would just be like, everybody should go. That's not realistic. That's not what's going to happen. You need to figure out who should stay, who should go, and who you're building around and who are the pieces that you want, who have the abilities, the tangible qualities and intangible qualities that you want on this roster. And we're not getting answers to that at all right now. And that's what's so frustrating and disappointing about that. A lost season is one thing in terms of making the playoffs or not, but you want to get enough data, enough eye test, all of that stuff on your roster to go, okay, we know what direction we need to go in from here, like the Memphis Grizzlies did. New Orleans isn't getting any of that right now. Look, I watch every game and I watch a lot of NBA. I couldn't really tell you the direction of this franchise or what they should do right now because they're playing so poorly that we haven't seen anything. And with that amount of talent that they have here, it shouldn't be this bad. Whether that means a coaching change or something else, they've got to do something different. They're not doing that. And until they do, it's going to be Groundhog Day. You're going to see the same thing over and over and over again, like we've been seeing for the past month. And to me, that is unacceptable. That's something they're going to need to change. But let's try and extrapolate some of this out a little bit. I thought this game, and the shooting in particular, was a little bit eye-opening for some stuff that we're going to get to see really soon. And let's talk about what these lineups are going to look like with Zion Williamson back in there, which could be in 3 weeks or so. Let's look at that coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by Robinhood. With Robinhood Gold, you don't need a silver spoon to eat up the financial favors of the 1%. Robinhood Gold allows others to get the rates and perks usually reserved for the high society. And now the resourceful individual with Robinhood Gold can earn the very liberal rate of 4.25% APY on uninvested cash and be rewarded with a handsome 3% retirement boost on IRA account contributions. Robinhood Gold provides the privileges of a high net worth for any net worth, and these generous benefits are now available for only $5 a month. The new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. Sign up at Robinhood.com/gold. Terms apply. For specific product disclosures, visit Robinhood.com/gold. Investing involves risk. Rate may change. Gold membership offered by Robinhood Gold, LLC. And thank you for making the Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube. Still growing despite the losses because we got important things to talk about here. And we're covering all those topics that you want to hear. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And now go check out the free daily Locked On Pelicans newsletter. You can sign up over at LockedOnDaily.com. One stop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox every single day, completely free. Again, LockedOnDaily.com. Scroll down till you just see the Locked On Pelicans logo, put in your email, and boom, there you go. You're going to be getting Locked On Pelicans in your inbox Monday through Friday. So let's keep talking about the Houston Rockets loss here. And there was a lot to be concerned about here. Again, they had a 30-point lead. They ran on New Orleans constantly. Pelicans didn't even try to get back in transition, didn't know how to score in transition either. It was just all around bad, right? Like, it was all around bad. And this team shouldn't look this bad, and they just look broken at the moment, and that is not an okay thing. So whatever the changes are, they need to make those immediately. Immediately. It's really as simple as that. One of the things that jumped out to me in this one was the three-point shooting, and the Pelicans started off really, really poorly shooting the ball in this game. So if you listened to the show the other day, one of the things you heard me saying that I do think we're going to come up on a pretty pivotal time for the Pelicans. When Zion Williamson comes back, when Jose Alvarado comes back, before Brandon Ingram comes back, you have an opportunity to basically use your future lineup, future starting lineup of guys that we kind of know are probably going to be on the team next season. DeJounte Murray, Herb Jones, Trey Murphy, Zion Williamson, and Yves Missi. Conceivably, if you move Ingram, if you move on from CJ eventually, that's like your core five-man starting lineup going forward. And as we've seen with this team, they struggled to score points. They struggled to win their minutes with the starters in previous years, and you need to do that. So we're going to be able to evaluate that starting lineup very soon. But I think this game gives you big-time concerns of, and I even mentioned this in that show we did the other day, of, is there enough shooting in there? When you looked at the Pelicans in this game, the Houston Rockets blocked 9 shots. 9 shots. They made rim protection easy here because no one was really a threat to shoot. The Pelicans finished 12 of 37, 32.4% from 3 in this game. That is not a good number at all. And you could tell that the Houston Rockets just weren't respecting basically any Pelican shooter outside of Trey Murphy in this one. Jordan Hawkins went 0 for 6. Murray went 2 of 5, and that's not bad. But Herb Jones was 0 for 2. Trey Murphy was 4 of 9. When you put your starting lineup out there of that 5-man unit that we just said, the shooter is Trey Murphy, obviously. Missi's not going to shoot threes. Zion's not going to shoot threes. Teams don't respect Herb Jones's three-point shooting ability, even if he shot a good percentage last year. So while he might make those threes, he doesn't take them in a large enough volume to really bend a defense or have the court gravity. So that's 3 guys of your 5 that aren't shooters. And then there's Murray, who's a mixed shooter at best when it comes from 3. That's not an ideal situation to be in. You know, Zion does need some space to operate. We saw it at least earlier on in this year, and even at times last year, that teams are going to make his life difficult at the rim. They're just going to put 2-3 guys at the rim because they're scared of him and they don't respect the shooters. They need to have shooting out there for him. And if you don't do it, that lineup's not going to do a whole lot. And that's what's kind of concerning to me when we think about that group. DeJounte Murray right now is shooting 27% from 3. That'll go up because that's not factoring in his numbers from this game, but it won't go up that much. This isn't a way that you're going to really win a ton of games. And I still think it's worth running those lineups and seeing what you get. But you can already start to see that maybe just the roster construction overall was flawed. Again, I think all of the moves have made sense in theory, but their inability to just get a stretch 5 ever around Zion Williamson in 6 years is unbelievably disappointing. Don't give me guys like Nicolo Melli and some of those other players, like a bona fide NBA-ready, good player starting 5 that shoots threes is something that they have lacked the entire time here. And that, to me, seems like the biggest red mark against the front office. It's not like they didn't try, but they could just never get a deal done. But it's going to feel like, what if, right? You have one of the most elite scorers at the rim, and you can't put enough shooting around him. They signed J.J. Redick. They've tried other things too. But overall, we've never really seen those sorts of lineups, and that's going to ultimately, whenever this era ends, whether it's this season or in the future, going to feel like a big what if and big mistake from the front office here on something they just weren't able to accomplish. And at the end of the day, it's results-based. You got to win games. You got to put a competent roster out there on the court. But this game and the shooting this season from the team, which has not been good, makes you wonder if it's just ever going to work with the way that they've built it. They're 26th in three-point percentage. They're 28th in terms of three-point attempts per game. Even the games when you don't have Zion and Ingram playing, Zion doesn't shoot threes. Ingram's been better about that this season, but historically hasn't done it as much as we'd like in New Orleans. Even those games when you have your 2 highest usage guys and they're not taking threes, you still don't take threes. Now, they took 37. That's close to that magic 40 number that they're never going to hit with Zion and Ingram in the starting lineup. But still, it's just not working. You can kind of see it. And it makes you feel like they need to do a full refresh, a bigger pivot than what we've seen from them already and before. And that's not where we've been in a great situation. So it's ultimately very disappointing for the way things have gone with this team so far. And it's going to lead to one of those bigger what ifs. So, we can talk about changes needing to happen now, whether with the coaching staff and other things. And a jolt of energy, I think, would be a good thing for this team at this point in time. But there's bigger problems here because you're not going to be able to completely turn this roster around. Now, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that starting 5 unit, and that's a unit they need a long look at till Brandon Ingram comes back healthy and then play him, because you need to figure out what you want to do with him too. More on him in the next segment here, because I do think this game actually probably hurt his trade value, even though he didn't play. That you've got to really reconsider if your ownership, right? This is an ownership thing for them to look at. You've really got to consider we need to just flush this all down and start fresh and make as much of a clean break as possible, because the next 2 drafts are really good. And if you can get 2 top draft picks in these next 2 drafts, you're going to be in real good position for the future. And if you trade Ingram, if you trade Zion, just kind of move on from everybody, have a fire sale in a sense, then maybe you can recoup enough draft assets to do this differently next time and maybe just get more stars that are reliable. And I think those are open questions. But look, Zion is such a special player and so good when he's healthy that maybe this all looks silly and moot when he's out there on the court and that starting unit can work. It should be decent defensively with Herb Jones and DeJounte Murray. Trey can be an elite scorer and is maybe your number 2, number 3 in that starting lineup there. Messi looks competent enough and is good. More on him next week as we look about his challenge for Rookie of the Year. Zion is Zion. At times has pushed for an all-NBA spot in 2 of the seasons that he's played in the NBA without making them, but still. Overall, I think that seems like it could be good, but we're going to need to know. But you're also not going to know if everyone is just playing like they did against the Houston Rockets. Look, you can put Zion on this team, and if they play like they did tonight, it won't matter. Right? That's why it doesn't matter right now when they have enough talent on the roster to be able to win these type of games, or at least just not look that bad. But they don't. There need to be bigger changes than just getting Zion Williamson back, Brandon Ingram back on this team, because, y'all, it's bad right now. Honestly, you could use the word pathetic to describe how they played, and I think that's an accurate thing to say. And that's not what we should be saying here. Come January, we're about to be a college basketball podcast here on Locked On Pelicans, because that's the way it's going right now. And when they're not actually improving in areas, it makes it really tough to know or even talk about this team in a constructive manner, because they're not showing you the things we need to see, other than, maybe you do need to kind of just clean house a little bit here. But they definitely need to really take a good long look in the mirror after this loss, because it was pretty concerning. And there's a knock-on effect on Brandon Ingram's trade value. Let's look at that, what I mean by that, because he didn't play. What are you talking about, Jake? I'll explain. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. I've been doing FanDuel ads for 4+ years now. That's the best offer you're going to get. So if you've been waiting to get in on the action with FanDuel, just do it now. Just do it now. $250 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. And look, things don't get easier for New Orleans. They're playing the Memphis Grizzlies at home. The Grizzlies, who just scored over 150 points, set a team franchise record for points scored in a game. They're minus 11.5 over the New Orleans Pelicans. Feels like it's going to be a big blowout. Maybe just give up those points, take the minus 11.5, and go get your $250 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. And you can do that by going to FanDuel.com and joining today. That's FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. And thank you for making the Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. And now for your second listen, go check out the Locked On Saints podcast. They're covering everything you want to know about the black and gold. Big off-season questions for them too. We're filled with big questions here in New Orleans. Ross Jackson, host of Locked On Saints, making sense of everything black and gold over at the Locked On Saints podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So let's wrap up talking about a pretty pathetic and maybe rock bottom loss for the New Orleans Pelicans against the Houston Rockets here. And that is another big story to come out of this, I think, is Brandon Ingram. And you're like, wait, Jake, he didn't play. Correct. He didn't play. He won't be playing for a minute because he's out injured. But this hurt his trade value. And what I mean by that is the Houston Rockets were one of the teams that have been linked to him. And it makes sense if they want to really kind of accelerate their timeline. They look good. Like the Houston Rockets are good this season. And they've taken a real step forward. And if they want to be maybe a title contender, try upgrading one or two positions, even if it's incrementally, and that can kind of get you there. And one of the areas of concern for a lot of people, national media, looking at the Houston Rockets here has been Jalen Green. Can he be that elite leading scorer for your team, a borderline all-star level guy? And there's been an open question with that. Well, against the New Orleans Pelicans, he did. 30 points for him, 12 of 21 shooting, that's 57%, 6 of 11 from 3. He looked awesome. 30 points in 29 and a half minutes, he was a plus 30. Every time he was out there on the court, they were basically winning his minutes by a point per minute. That's pretty absurd. He looked great in this one. If he looks that good and plays like that, and he's been on a bit of a tear recently, they're not going to trade for Brandon Ingram. They're not going to give up anything for Brandon Ingram because they don't want to stunt the growth of a guy like Jalen Green. And so that hurts his trade value because if they're not interested in him, it only means offers for him are going to go down. The fewer suitors you have, the fewer trade partners, the fewer better offers you're going to get. The offers are just going to always go down. It's literally like supply and demand, right? You can't go to another team and be like, Houston's offering this. Can you beat it? And they're like, well, we want them. Let's do it. When Houston's not offering anything, you're going to lose a lot of leverage in those trade negotiations. And that's where it's hurting New Orleans. You know, it'd be one thing to lose. It'd be one thing if it was like Alperen Şengün or Jabari Smith Jr. going off. Just anyone other than Jalen Green. Or just beat this frickin' team that makes them be like, oh yeah, we need a Brandon Ingram. Let's go and get a Brandon Ingram. And you didn't do that now. They're going to look at this and be like, we feel really good about ourselves. We feel really good about Jalen Green here. We don't need a Brandon Ingram. And now they're not going to move for him. Now, maybe they still will, but you get the point that I'm trying to make here. It's not an ideal situation. These are the games that, look, if you're New Orleans, these matter. Now, the players don't care. They love Brandon Ingram. They probably don't want to have him traded away. So that's not kind of factoring into them. But if you're Willie Green, if you're others on the team, like you really wanted this one or at least make it close. Make them be like, wow, we barely beat the New Orleans Pelicans who are bad. No, that's not how that went. They rolled in this one. So it has that kind of compounding effect on the team here. All of this stuff matters, and maybe that means they're going to end up re-signing Brandon Ingram on a more team-friendly 1-in-1 deal, 1 year with a player option for the second year that he can opt out of. So it hurts though. Or maybe if you want Brandon Ingram to stay here, it helps because it kind of keeps him here because they're going to need to figure that out. I still maintain that CJ McCollum's the guy that's more likely to get traded than Brandon Ingram, but I think you're going to see a couple of teams that are going to start to get really desperate, and I bet a Brandon Ingram type of player is going to look real good all of a sudden to them when it comes to that. Look, even the Sacramento Kings, who are kind of desperate, they're at least winning when I'm recording this one right now. So overall, it's mildly concerning that you lose this game in this fashion, I think, and not what you want whatsoever when it comes to it. They need to figure out the Brandon Ingram situation or whatever the plan of attack is going to be. Now, again, we talked about it in the rumor roundup in yesterday's show. I do think it could end up being okay, and it's probably kind of similar to the situation with the Miami Heat and Jimmy Butler. And they're like, we are not trading Jimmy Butler, but because they're not worried about losing him in free agency for nothing. They can facilitate a sign and trade, and it's probably going to give them back something better or better offers than they were going to get maybe if they move him before the trade deadline. Similar thing could be the case for Brandon Ingram too. So that's worth keeping in mind when it comes to all of that. But yeah, not great for the Pelicans losing to the Houston Rockets in the fashion that they did here. And that one really hurts. So let's see what happens against the Memphis Grizzlies tonight. Grizzlies coming in red hot. I don't fully believe in that team though. We'll see what they look like in this one. New Orleans tends to play them pretty tough, so hopefully we can get back in the win column here because just any sort of win would feel really good, I think, right now. So that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Pelicans, this week of Locked On Pelicans as well. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. I'll be back with y'all on Monday. We'll talk about the Memphis game. We'll talk about the weekend. We'll look at Eve Misi next week. I got a bunch of show topics that are going to be really important. We're covering those next week here on the Locked On Pelicans podcast. See y'all next time.